Joan Tollifson, it's a pleasure to be with you. How lovely to see you. How are you?
I'm fine, and it's great to be with you, Simon. Wonderful to meet
I
you.
have, it's wonderful to meet you too. I've so enjoyed listening to you and reading your stuff. So to have a conversation with you is a pleasure for me. And you've got you're a wonderful writer of books, you're a wonderful speaker, and you've got some fantastic titles. Now, one of which I particularly like, and it's called The End of Self Improvement. And I just love that title for a number of reasons. Perhaps we can dive into that. But why don't I start by asking what made you go with that? And did you chuckle to yourself at what a good title it was?
I did, and I had the title for a long time, actually, before the book was finished. And every time I would mention it to somebody, well, every now and then somebody would look at me with utter, because the full title is Death, the End of Self
Yeah.
Improvement. And sometimes people would look at me with like complete, like, what on earth are you saying? But most people would laugh with this sort of sense of relief. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. And my first book back in 1995 was subtitled Waking Up from the Story of My Life. So,
Yeah.
so then I eventually I got to Death, the End of Self Improvement.
And
But
those
anyway,
two titles, they're linked, aren't they? They point
yeah,
towards a similar thing.
yeah, they kind of are. And my teacher and friend Tony Packer, who I was living with at the time that I wrote my first book, after it was published, she said, "Your next book could be titled Waking Up Again from the Story of My Life." but but anyway, yeah. So the end of self improvement. Well, I do have a chapter in the book distinguishing between what I'm calling self improvement and what I'm calling genuine transformation, because I'm not saying that we should all just, you know, um, give in to being, unhappy, miserable, horrible, depressed, etc. Um, but our culture is so fixated on self improvement and on these deep feelings of self hate and self doubt and inadequacy and not being good enough and then having to fix ourselves. And, you know, um, and it's one thing to have sort of a genuine aspiration or something that you want to kind of wake up from delusion again and again, and you want to be, a loving person in the world as opposed to somebody who's bringing more and more suffering into the world. And I go to the gym to keep my body in shape, and so I'm not in any way disparaging any of that, but it's more about what in excuse me, in my experience, the kind of genuine transformation happens out of simply being present right here, right now. It doesn't happen out of being fixated on, I should be different, or maybe in a moment I'll have some big breakthrough, or maybe tomorrow I'll have a big breakthrough, or I think I had one last week, I've got to get it back. That doesn't do it. Um, so um, so it's a kind of paradox, because it's like when the trying to improve falls away and the seeking for something different, better, etc., falls away, then that's when real transformation and waking up kind of happens. So, and when I talk
Yeah.
about these things like things falling away or waking up, I don't mean some big grandiose once and for all thing. I mean, now and now and now,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
waking
Yeah.
up again and again from the
Absolutely.
story of my life.
Well, yeah. Yeah. Out of thoughts of past and future. And that self improvement thing, it's quite sneaky because it does insinuate that if you're going to improve yourself, that means you can't be okay now,
Yeah.
which does have within it the seeds of dissatisfaction. And
Yeah.
I sometimes call this success evangelism, which is very prominent in America
Yeah. That's
and the
great.
and and the UK. This idea of at one sometime I'm going to arrive, I'm going to become, everything will line up, I'll have all my stuff together. I'll be my best self. That's another good one. And but it's just an illusion, isn't it? And the problem with it is as well, we do then overlook this moment, however this moment happens to be showing up. And
Yeah.
when you sort of let go of that and just pay attention to this moment, again, however mundane it may seem to be, or even painful, you can start to notice, hang on a sec, this is miraculous right now. This is miraculous. And
Yeah.
it's this bizarre joke, isn't it? But yeah, it's this hamster wheel of it's a trap. But I was on it, the self-improvement journey, the self-improvement quest. And I think I had to be on it to realize that wasn't it, if you know what I mean. Like, it led me
Yeah.
to, for example, these kind of conversations. And I do feel like that's often the way it needs to go. But it's a funny old thing. It really is.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's almost inevitable that it's gonna start out that way, for most people anyway. Why else you're gonna take up meditation? Well, actually, I mean, in some way we take it up because we just enjoy we may just discover that just being quiet and doing nothing is enjoyable, and listening to the
Mm.
rain is just miraculous and enjoyable. But often there's that self-improvement, um, getting somewhere, and there's so much that feeds into that, aside from all the cultural messages
Mm.
about success and all that. In the spiritual world, there's all the enlightenment stories and everybody telling their story of the great moment when everything fell away, and, you know, and so it's just sets you up. And I don't know if if it ever, it's the kind of thing that it's a very deep habit of the mind, and it can pop up again and again, so it's not about trying not to seek or trying not to try is just one more layer of the same thing. So
Yeah.
if seeking happens, then you just notice what it's like to seek. But the interesting thing about all
Yeah.
that self-improvement stuff, in contrast to genuine transformation, the self-improvement stuff is always about me. It's about this little, me
Mm.
character who seems to be at the center of my life, and who inevitably seems to be incomplete and deficient and not good enough, and in danger, vulnerable and in danger. And so it's always about sort of saving that little me, and finally being okay. Like, if I get enlightened,
Yeah.
everyone will love me finally, and I'll be okay, and my parents will be proud of me, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. And as you said earlier, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be kinder or more loving or improve certain behaviors or patterns or anything like that. But it's that word self improvement, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, exactly.
what is it that you're trying to improve? Like, let's try and pin that down.
Eh,
So that leads me then to another question and line of inquiry, which is this word I that everyone uses, certainly in America and UK, every day, multiple times. And I'm sure you'll have noticed that if you, particularly people who aren't, let's say, on this path, if you ask them to pin it down, you'll get a whole variety of answers, none of which are none of which stand up to scrutiny, do they? That's the thing. I wonder what your experience is in terms of this exploration, and how would you guide someone to think about, or to understand what they are actually pointing to when they say "I," as we all do.
yeah. Well, first of all, I always invite, people to explore it more experientially rather than to think about it, to really feel into these
Hmm.
questions and look and see. And of course, on a certain level, where when we say I, we're talking about me, the person, the body, mind, character. I'm talking about Joan, you're talking about Simon. And that's a perfectly legitimate, functional, everyday use of the word, which we're not trying to banish. But if we
No.
look deeper, like, what do I really mean? What is this I? And again, not to think, but to really just feel into that, to really look, what am I actually at the bottom of everything referring to when I say I? You know, and it's deeper than, anything that came secondhand. Like, when I was a baby, I didn't know that my name was Joan. I didn't know that I was female. I didn't know that, you know, anything about anything. I was just present and aware. I was just
Mm.
here, just
Yeah.
experiencing. And
Yeah.
when I look deeply into what am I referring to with that word I, what do we find? It seems to me that we find just exactly that. Just this presence, this undeniable presence or awareness or beingness or aliveness or experiencing, whatever words we want to use. None of the words are it, but just
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And we don't find, we don't find there's no little me in there who's, sitting at a control panel, sort of operating the body or something, like making, authoring my thoughts and making my decisions and running my life. That seems like there is that little me in there, but the more we look into it, the more we discover that's just a kind of thought, an afterthought. Like, I need to do this, I did do this, I should have done this. It's a thought, and when you actually look for it, you can't find that little me. So in one sense, when you look for the I, you find nothing at all, and you find everything. You find just this whole happening. And in that sense, we're all the same I in a way. We're all the same
Yes.
aware presence. And yet we're each have a unique kind of whatever filtering system of conditioning and everything else. So we're all kind of looking at a different movie, which is how we get
Yeah.
into a lot of conflict and difficulty.
Yeah.
But if you go deep enough, we're all really one whole. We're one whole happening, one whole presence, one whole, the whole universe. Everything is one whole undivided happening.
Yeah. Right. I'm just going to pass this down a little bit, because, yeah, so we have this unique expression. As you say, there's Joan and there's Simon, with it, with our own body, our own thoughts that are being experienced here, different to the thoughts that are being experienced there, different to the body, different to the memories, different to all that. But as you say, if you trace back all these things that come and go, sensations of the body, perceptions of the body, perceptions of the world, thoughts, feelings, these all come and go. But behind that, when you sense into it, there is just this subtle, very subtle, so easy to overlook, aware presence, as you said. And it's funny, you mentioned when you were a baby and you didn't know you were Joan and you didn't know you were female and you didn't know you were American. And I have a baby daughter now. And so she doesn't, she does know her name is, she knows her name now and she's starting to learn. But as you say, there's just this aware presence. Now, if you had to tell a baby, be present as we tell adults, I mean,
Yeah,
it'd be nonsense. It'd be
yeah,
nonsense because without the stories that we lay on top of it, there is only presence. So that instruction to be present, we all hear, it's meaningless to a baby. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like if they could talk, they'd be like, "What the hell are you on about?"
yeah, yeah, yeah. They're just kind of naturally. And I remember my friend and teacher. She didn't like the word teacher, but my teacher, Tony Packer, talking about being with her grandson and how they were going for a walk on a winter evening, and he sat down in the light from a street lamp, and he was just sitting in that light and fascinated by the light. And she said, was he practicing something? And it's kind of like um, a baby is just naturally curious about everything and interested in everything, and they're not
Mm,
inhibited yet. So it's like if they're hurt or something, they just start crying, and if something's funny, they just start laughing, and they're not censoring themselves yet. They haven't learned what's appropriate and inappropriate and all that sort of thing, and they're naturally present. Um, and then you know through the socialization process, which is inevitable and natural and, in many ways has to happen, um, we learn, oh, I am Joan, and and we're told you are responsible for your life and you have to make something of yourself, and you're going to have to go to college and get a job, and all this stuff, and all of it's kind of like all of a sudden this vast open space just kind of shrinks down into this little encapsulated feeling. And you can see that happening sometimes. I tell many times the story of walking down the street in Chicago and feeling just completely open, spacious, just being. And I run into somebody I went to high school with, and she says, what have you done with the last 40 years or whatever it was, and immediately I could feel this kind of I contracted down. All of a sudden I was Joan, and it was like, what have I done? And, trying to come up with my story, and so you could just feel it happening sometimes just in the course of everyday life. There many times, I think, during any ordinary day for anyone, we're just here as this open, vast presence and experiencing. And we're just, washing the dishes or whatever. And then all of a sudden, somebody says, what have you done with your life? Or we have a thought like, why did I do that? Or why did I say that? Or what am I going to do tomorrow or whatever? And all of a sudden, we contract down kind of, and we don't really contract down. I mean, it's just a sensation, really. It's just kind of a sensation and a thought that where, oh, now we feel identified as this little person, this character that, always seems to feel a little bit deficient and uncertain and, possibly wrong, and has to defend itself and assert itself and protect itself and all of that.
Yeah. And which is all illusory again. So to come back to self-improvement, the idea, for example, of self-improvement for an infant, again, is absurd. but then as we get older, and as you say, we take on these ideas and these concepts and whatever, then we start buying into that. Well, because there's this constructed character with a story, with a past and with a history, which, as you say, is necessary to navigate the social landscape. Like it's valuable, for example, to understand that you live in America and I live in Britain. But I think a step further than that is still to realize that America and Britain are both just ideas. They're not actually real, but
as our Simon and Joan and the body and the mind and all of it.
Yeah, exactly, right. And it's interesting. I was there's two things that come to mind. First of all, I had insomnia in my 20s. I've written a post about this, and I think part of it stemmed from this aware presence that we're talking about, it never goes to sleep. And I think I got confused by that for a bit of a time, because you shut your eyes and there's still this presence, as it were, behind the eyes. And I was sort of, I don't know, I got kind of confused and got myself in a knot. So I was thinking, I've got to get rid of this. Like, hang on, this is still there. How can I sleep while this is here, and then over time, I think that led me to an understanding that it's not that ever goes. Yes, our thoughts go, perceptions, everything like that. But this is always there. And then I was on the tube a little bit earlier today, and I was looking around, and there were people on their phones. I remember there was one guy in particular. I think he was playing Tetris or whatever. And I was looking around, and what you said about that kind of open spaciousness, this sense of just being, this sense of this being in touch with the aware presence that we are. It's very, very subtle. It's so easy to miss. We seemingly lose touch with it without ever losing touch with it. And as a result, it's so easy then to think, there's nothing here. It's kind of boring. If there's not something going on in whatever form, I need to occupy my time because there's nothing here. But it's like, no, actually, if you stop and just sit there, in time, it seems to just become more self-evident. Do you know what I mean? The
Yeah.
subtlety of it. Do you
Yeah.
see what I'm trying to get at here?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think and of course, it's not that there's anything wrong with, being on our phone like that, although it does seem sad to me, when I see people just going down the street on a beautiful, beautiful day, and they're all
Mm.
just staring at their phones. It's like, stop, wake up. But, just sitting on the tube, for example, if you put your phone down and just start looking around, it's just this amazing universe, all these interesting
Yeah,
people and colors and shapes and things going on. It's like, incredibly interesting, actually. Or if you look out the window, if you're not underground,
100%.
um, you know, it's like incredibly interesting sitting in a waiting room anywhere, And then, as you
Yeah,
say, you
yeah,
can
yeah.
also tune into this very subtle kind of just subtle sense of beingness or presence or whatever. It's not, that's not even separate from the sensations
No.
and everything. It's one whole happening, because I think a lot of people get sort of hung up on trying to see awareness and be identified as awareness, and all of that, as if it's some sort of separate thing or something, you know
Yeah.
and it's not. I mean, the word is helpful because it points to a certain aspect of what's here, but it's like none of it is, all the words kind of make it seem like we have all these things, including awareness, and
Yeah.
yet the closer you look at any of these things, you can't find anything, especially with awareness or beingness. What is it? I mean, no one would deny, that we're aware, that we're conscious, that we're present. You can't, you'd have to be here to deny it. But what is it? What is it exactly? And you can't, you can't get hold of it. And yet you can't deny it.
No.
So it's like,
Yeah.
you know, yeah. And of course, when we do focus on our phone, we're immediately going into some sort of movie world. I mean, we're either reading the news or we're playing some game or we're texting with friends. We're doing, none of that is wrong or anything, but it's all also it's all part of life, But it takes you into a world where, where you're going to be more likely to be sort of caught up in the sense of separation and me and um, conflict. And, as soon as you start reading the news, and then I have my opinions, and, oh, other people have different opinions, and this is happening, it shouldn't be happening, and, blah, blah, blah. And um, so, and, that's part of life. So it's not, again, not like it's wrong, but you can notice the difference between that as the focus of attention and just being here without a focus of attention, just kind of the way a baby or a toddler would be here, just kind of like, wow, this is, of course now even the toddlers are on their little
This
fake
is,
phones. It's really disturbing,
I
but
know, I
but
know. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, on the phone I do think, as you say, there's nothing wrong with it, but it is addictive. There's a lot of
oh yeah,
addictive
it's very
scrolling and
addictive.
stuff,
Yeah.
which I do think is hugely problematic. And you mentioned about being in a waiting room, and so I've mentioned this a couple of times. And I wrote a post about it fairly recently. I was getting a train, and I was waiting where they announced the platforms, and there was 100 plus people there. And this was a station I used to spend a lot of time in when I worked for the BBC Radio 1. And I was there, and it was probably 15 minutes to wait. And it was this amazing sight. Loads of people. There were
Uh,
birds swooping down. There were cameras in all the corners. It was just this mad scene. But as I looked around, everyone, it seemed, wanted to just rush and escape that moment to find out where their train was, because that was a more important moment. Then obviously once you're on a train where you're only going somewhere, so there's a more important moment to come. So we live in this way, and as you say, miss that childlike wonder, as it were, of this miraculous scene, however it happens to be turning up. So I just wanted to share that with you. But then, just to zero in on this being side, I remember chatting to Professor Donald Hoffman, and I think he put it quite well in terms of when I want to get onto your essay about meditation and practice, and this is my way into it. And he spoke about, when you meditate or just sit still or do nothing, you can kind of sense this presence behind the eyes, as it were, or behind, not that isn't right, but behind experience, let's say.
Yeah.
And if you sort of take your attention, I quite like when he said this, because it does give a bit of a pointer, and it's like turning your attention in on itself, and it's like there's something there, but you can't grasp it, you can't pin it down. It's not a thing in any other sense of the word, and this is why it's so subtle, isn't it? But there is this thing, this presence there behind what we see, behind what we hit. I know I'm
Yeah.
going around the houses here, Joan. Bear with me. But and so, as you say, even though it's not separate from everything, but it's at the heart of
Yeah.
our experience at
I
any
like,
moment. Do you know what I mean?
yes, and I think the word heart touches it for me much more than, the behind thing. People can get sort of caught up in trying to go behind, behind, behind.
Yeah,
You know, it's
yeah,
it's like it's at the core. It's the most subtle.
yes,
It's like it's not other than any of that other all
no,
of that, but it's kind of like, all those old sayings, like the eye can't see itself, the sword can't cut itself. Like, you think about the eye, that the physical eye, now we're talking about that, but it applies to the other eye too. The eye can't see
yeah,
itself. It's like those are all metaphors, of course, but it's, pointing to the fact that there's, anything that we can sort of conceptualize or perceive or imagine or see is an object. and
mm,
and sort of, there's a kind of a presence or an awareness that is subtler and at the core, you could say, or behind, that, can't be objectified. You can't see it, you can't grasp it, you can't find it, and yet it's everywhere. There's nothing else really, so you know it's like what I am, it's like what everything is. And so as long as we're sort of, and we do get on the spiritual path, caught up in trying to get it, trying to understand it, trying to experience it, trying to grasp it, and the more we do that, of course, the more we're sort of putting it out there as an object, that, and of course, all of that is coming from that contracted sense of being little me, who has to get this thing because that'll be really good for me. And so, we're like trying to get what's always already here, what's never been missing. And we can't get it because
yeah,
we are it, so
yeah,
it's like, but we can sort of, we can enjoy just tuning into it in subtler ways, and not with the sort of aim of, I'm going to get this or I'm going to experience this, but just to enjoy the kind of subtleties of being, you know.
yes. And so you wrote a really great Substack post that I've cut and paste, and about practice, because by practice I mean meditation or self-inquiry or just sitting, because this is an interesting subject, because people do have some quite strident views on it. Generally speaking, people think, I would say, of meditation as fundamentally a sort of relaxation tool. I'd say that's the general population. But once you start, let's say, moving in the sort of circles we tend to, people can then fall into one of two camps. One is around this: any practice you do is self-defeating, because you're emphasizing, well, there's a subject meditating on an object, for example, your breath or a mantra or whatever it might be, and therefore you're accentuating this sense of duality. And then the others who say you've got to put in X amount of work. Now, I tend to think that practice is valuable. I do see real value in meditation. I do meditate partly because it helps me with my attention, with my focus, but also because it seems to make this presence that we're talking about become ever more obvious in my experience. Um, so yes, first, and I love this essay of yours, this post of yours, because to read nuance when, when everyone else can be so dogmatic around it was very refreshing. So I'm just going to read um, the top line of your post, and it goes like this. I frequently hear and read statements like these about meditation. Meditation is a dualistic practice that only reinforces the separate self. Or, I don't have time to meditate. Or, I can't meditate, my mind is too busy. Are any of these statements true? First of all, what is meditation? And then you go on to say meditation involves curiosity about what is, an exploration of what is. And so I just wanted to do a bit of an exploration on practice, on meditation, or whatever. Now, how I meditate, Joan, tends to be I will meditate on my breath, for example, in my belly or at the tip of my nose, and I'll do that for say 20 minutes. And then at the end of that, roughly 20 minutes or so, then I will start doing a bit of self inquiry. And the question that's the one that's rolling with me at the moment is, when am I? Because obviously you can't answer that in time. And then also throughout the day, just as you said, like when I'm going around, just sensing this this wide open being. So those I would say are how I quote unquote practice. Now, how do you tend to do it, as it were?
Uh, well, I don't have any sort of set way. I don't even really like the word practice, although I use it sometimes. And my most recent Substack was actually called something like "Is there a practice?" It's not the one that was an older one, but
Right.
but yeah, I because yeah, but I don't object to the word. But anyway, and the word meditation also, because it means so many things, you know, I almost tend to avoid it as much as I can, but I also use it. But so I don't really have a like, okay, every morning, almost without fail, every morning I sit down on my little zafu on my cushion, and then I sit for, I don't time it or anything, but it's usually something between 15 minutes and half an hour, 40 minutes, it just depends. And I'm not really doing anything in particular. I'm just sitting there, and sometimes I do different things that pop into my mind, to do. Like, I just recently listened to if I just heard somebody describing a certain practice, I might try it, just out of curiosity or something, or um, or whatever, or whatever kind of. So I might be doing something specific, like watching my breath or something, but I don't tend to focus on something like any of that. I'm more just kind of open to whatever's showing up. And so it could be just listening to the
Hmm.
sounds of the freeway that I hear, the interstate, or it could be, the birds, or the feelings in the body, or thoughts as they come and go, and, just kind of being there with the whole happening, as the whole happening. Um, and
Yeah.
and then I don't do any particular practice like, who am I or something like. I mean, I have done those in the past, like, and to me, it's more like for example, at one point, I just became very curious, not out of nowhere, about could I find a boundary between inside and outside, and I just started feeling into that, whether I could find a place where
That's a good one.
inside turned into outside, and I discovered I couldn't find a place. And the same with what we were talking about earlier, like looking to see what do I mean by I, and discovering that it's just this aware, open, spacious presence. And so, yeah, there could be
Yeah.
inquiries that come up, but I don't have any sort of set inquiry that I'm, constantly going over or something. And then, meditation in my
Sure.
view is
Sure.
just
Yeah.
your whole life, so like you were saying. So it's just, it's just noticing what's going on, like enjoying taking a walk, enjoying, you know, visiting with the dog next door, enjoying the sound of rain, enjoying, and noticing when I get triggered, if I'm in a conversation with a friend and we start talking about politics and we disagree, and I can feel that kind of contracting, tensing up in the body, and I notice that I'm getting very identified with my opinions, and that I'm really feeling self-righteous and like this person is wrong, and I feel threatened in some way, and just kind of feeling all that, and being interested in all that. And if I get really upset about something, I might come back to it later on and just kind of, you know, look into it, like, well, what is going on there? What is that feeling of, anger or feeling threatened? What am I afraid of, or what's being threatened? And just, again, not thinking about it and not trying to come up with the answer, but just kind of really, again, feeling into, what is that? What is feeling threatened by this person seeing it differently? And, what is this feeling that I have to convince them? What is that? And just kind of being interested in all that. So to me, that's part of it. And and it's not like, yeah, and if there's physical pain, and then it can be just exploring, or emotional pain, it can be just exploring it as experience, instead of, just like, what is it? Okay, I have this headache, for example. What is it? I don't right now, but I'm just saying that an example. If I have a headache, what is it? Like, just feeling the actual sensations, in noticing the difference between the actual sensations and the thoughts that might be about, like, oh, this headache is horrible. I can't stand it. What if it gets worse? Um, Blah blah blah. Um, Instead of, when I tune into the actual sensations, it's no longer unbearable. It even can become interesting. Sometimes it even disappears and then comes back and disappears. And, so it's really interesting. And whereas the way we often react when we're in pain is that we resist and we think about it, like, I want to get rid of this. What if it gets worse? I can't stand this. And what that does is create that sense of encapsulation again, and a sense of separation, and that thought story that I am being attacked by this pain, and I'm in danger here. I've got to push it away. And instead, when there's just a complete kind of opening in which we're not separate from the pain anymore, we're not little me anymore. There's just this ever-changing sensations with no me being attacked. It changes the whole thing, and so just, it's really about having that kind of curiosity and interest and explorative spirit, with everything that shows up, in everyday life. And it doesn't mean never, looking at my phone, or, I love watching movies on Netflix and things like that. It's not about, never doing anything like that, or that
No,
anytime I'm in pain,
no.
I have to just be with it. And I mean, I went through cancer treatment, and it was, sometimes it was so painful, I just turned on a movie to distract myself, I mean, it's not like I felt like I had to just sit there the whole time experiencing it. And I took the painkillers and everything else. But
Yeah.
so anyway, you can get really sort of, you can get sort of, I don't can't come up with the word I want, but if you think of yourself as a meditator, and you can sort of like on a purification kick or something, where you feel like you have to be really good and pure, and you have to, you just experience everything, never look at your phone, blah blah blah. It's sort of like, it's more about finding a balance. You just froze up. Can you still hear me? Oh, there, you're back.
Yeah, I'm still here. Still here. Don't
Okay.
worry. I'm
Yeah.
still here.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, no, that's all super interesting, and I love the way you described all that. And there is something paradoxical to some degree about, for example, meditation. if we think about it in terms of, you know, a practice, even though we understand the limits of that word, but insofar as if you are meditating to try and get somewhere, which refers back to the whole self-improvement thing, right?
Right.
If I meditate now, at some point in the future, I'll get somewhere. Then, I mean, that is self-defeating, because the whole thing about meditation is going more deeply into this moment.
Yeah.
Again, with the limits of language, However, I do know a couple of people in particular who have had very profound experiences. One guy has been through, and I don't doubt him at all 8 jhanas just through focused meditation.
I don't
That
know
kind of
anything
just
about the
utter
jhanas.
bliss. Okay, all right. Well, let's just say it's in very profound and mind-blowing experiences,
Okay.
of overwhelming bliss and things like that. And then another guy, you might have you heard of Gary Weber?
Yes.
So Gary has got a very interesting book called Happiness Beyond Thought, and he was this avid yoga and self-inquirer guy. And he said he was in a yoga pose one day, came up out of it, boom, just all the noise had gone, all the self-referential chatter, all the what do people think of me? I never should have said that. Why am I not getting this opportunity? All that noise that we have. So I do think there's this interesting paradox of you can't use it to get anywhere. It's not about self-improvement and practice. And yet it does seem to open to some people through grace, whatever it might be, the possibility of these transformational experiences, if you like. So there is a bit of a paradox there, and
Yeah.
you don't want to go chasing after that, but there does seem to be a bit of a paradox there. I wonder what you thought of that.
Yeah. Well, I think when we shift attention, because our attention is so often on the thought world. It's on our thoughts, stories, mental movies, what's happening on our phone, etc. That's probably more than at any other time in history in our Western culture. That's our attention is
Oh, for
absorbed in that
sure.
kind of
Yeah,
thing
yeah,
in a way that it maybe never has been for
yeah.
centuries. And
Oh, I don't
when
doubt that.
we
Yeah,
when we shift attention out of that realm into just the realm of, you know, tuning into sensations, auditory sensations, visual, just listening to the sounds of traffic, feeling the breathing, feeling sensations in the body, hearing the birds, whatever, enjoying the visual feast of the moment. When we shift attention into that realm, we're automatically tuning into something that's much more fluid and amorphous and ungraspable and whole and alive than in the thought stories. It's like we're it gives us, where we can read about all these things like, non-separation, non-duality, all is one, etc. But when you actually tune into the sensory world, you begin to experience things that way much more readily than when you're caught up
yeah,
in the thought story of how am I doing, am I okay, etc. And um, so yeah, I think it doesn't have to be formal meditation, although I think formal meditation can be very helpful. Um, and,
yeah,
you know, anything that we do can become a hindrance, and then we may have to do something else as sort of an antidote to it. So it's like there's I think we have a natural kind of guidance system if we tune into it, and we don't even have to tune into it. It's basically just whatever it's what's running our life, really. I mean, and we find what we need at every moment. We can't plan, oh, I should do this for the next 10 years. Well, we can have that thought, but whether we end up doing that for the next 10 years, who knows. So it's like, I think and there is always going to be, like, I part of why I meditate is because I enjoy it, and part of why I meditate is because it does feel like it's wholesome and good for me in some way, and helpful to me in being more open and less caught up in my thought stories and all of that, less, emotionally reactive, etc. um, the same way when I go to the gym, I'm not just going to the gym for no reason. I mean, it's because I really want to keep, as I get older, I want to keep functional. I want to keep my body functional and you know, as much as possible. And that's gets very important as you get older. And I know that. And I don't really like going to the gym that much, but I go, and it's a kind of discipline. And, and so I
Yeah.
can't say that yes, there is some sort of, improvement thing involved there, or maintenance thing involved there. But, if I
Yeah.
spend when I'm in the gym, where is my attention? Is it just on the experience of bicycling or whatever? Or is it in some story about, this is boring, I can't stand this, why do I have to do this? Or, when is this going to be over? Or something like that. Um, and if I notice that my thoughts are going in that direction, then, it's possible to wake up from that, and like, just, oh, wait a minute,
Yes.
and um, yeah. So I think, and one of the things that I think happens in meditation, I spent 5 years on staff at a meditation retreat center where we had roughly 10, I don't know, week-long silent retreats every year. So I did a lot of silent retreats. And
Yeah.
one of the things that happens when you do a lot of meditation like that is you start to see things about yourself that you just weren't aware of. I mean, even the very first time I did an all-day sitting at the San Francisco Zen Center, I tell this story often, I, for the first time, noticed that every thought I was having was about the future. Where was I going to park the car the next day when I got to work? What was I going to do on the break that was coming up? When could I go to my next
Mm.
one-day sitting, etc. And I just suddenly
Mm.
saw that. It was like, and then that pattern, that habitual pattern, it didn't fall away forever after in that moment. But from then on, I was aware of it. I saw it. And I saw it as it happened. And I began to see what was painful about it and what was alluring about it. I began to, in the same with, when I was on staff at the retreat center, I mean, I saw all kinds of things about myself that were not very flattering, that, didn't fit with my self-image. I mean, I saw myself being manipulative and weaseling and, like trying to get people to like me. And, you know, it's like, so you start to see this. And I started to notice these subtle things, like when I said something to somebody that was just a little bit passive aggressive and mean, just a little tiny bit, I could feel like the blood going up into my face, and this little sensations that before I might not have even noticed that I'd even done that. And all of a sudden, you become more sensitive. You become more, it's like anything else. If you're an artist and you study art or something, you become more and more, sensitive to the subtleties of color and shape and light and all that, it's, or anything so you just begin to become more sensitive to all the subtleties of experience, and of the human mind, and of your
Yeah.
particular human mind. And and all these patterns
Yeah.
that come up, like you see that stuff about yourself, and then of course the reaction is, oh no, that's horrible, a bad me. And then you see that that's just another thought, and you begin to see that it's
Yeah.
all just kind of impersonal. It's not like I'm
Mhm.
doing that on purpose. It's just all happening. And but the more you see it,
Yes. Yes.
the less easily you get caught up in it. And I still get caught up. I mean, I still get triggered and upset and all of that. But
Yeah.
so I don't think there's any end to this, or any.
No.
And the whole thing I want to
No.
say
There's
about,
no there's no perfection, is there? No.
no final perfection, no. I mean, and like in any, like the thing about all those self-referential thoughts falling away, I mean, I think that probably happens to everybody in any ordinary day many, many times, and just goes unnoticed, you know
Absolutely.
and so
Yeah.
for some people it may be a very dramatic experience, like what you were describing. and some people do clearly, like Eckhart Tolle had some sort of, really dramatic,
Mm.
apparently, um, change that never really, I've never had anything like that where, one day I'm this way and then something, the next day everything is completely different
Yeah.
forever after. I mean, that's never happened to me.
Yeah.
For me, it's been much more gradual,
No.
and so
Yeah.
I think it's a real pitfall on the spiritual path, to be chasing those kinds of dramatic experiences, and then people who have them also then spend, a lot of time trying to get them back. And I had my own smaller versions of it that I tried to get back, like,
Sure.
sometimes you're just in this open,
Yeah.
spacious, wonderful place, and then the next thing you know, you're all caught up in some depressive thought story, and there's kind of like, oh, I got to get back to, you know uh,
Yeah.
and
Yes. It's so funny it's so funny and so subtle, isn't it?
it
And,
is.
like I found it's very similar to you. It's this gentle, um, increase in this sense of peace, being aware of this presence that had seemingly for a long time been completely invisible,
Mm.
that coming more to the fore. As you say, being more aware of patterns, being more aware of how the mind can capture and seeing through stories. I'll give you a quick example. Actually, it was quite funny. So yesterday I had an important meeting. It's always hectic in the morning with our two kids, getting them to school and nursery. And I think my wife and I hadn't had a particularly good night's sleep because of the baby, and we were rushing to get them sort of ready for bed. Sorry, ready to get out the door. And she kept, anyway, put it this way: we had a tiny little bicker, right? And then we went our separate ways. And I had this kind of important meeting. She rang me half an hour later. She goes, "I feel a bit sad about this morning." And I said, "Look, you had your story about what happened. I had my story about what happened. They were both true, and they were both absolutely nonsense. So let's just drop it right now." And we're like, "Okay, fine." And it's rather than having to indulge the stories that we love to do, that
Yeah.
you can just drop them that much more quickly. And so this, to relate it back to sort of self improvement, in some way that there is a sort of self improvement on that level, but as you say, it's not personal. There's no character at the middle to buff up or anything like that. And then one other thing I wanted to add was, in terms of how my experience meditation is, absolutely not as a way to get somewhere. Whenever I've had that mindset, it's very self defeating. But when I find that I meditate and my mind stills, it's like sleeping while awake, if that means anything to you. It's this sort of, oh god, that's bloody nice. The narratives in the head. It's just, oh, I can just let it all go for a little bit, and just, oh, I don't want to leave this sort of place of pleasant, quiet stillness. That's
Yeah.
something that I've noticed has become more pronounced compared to, for example, when you go to the gym and you're like, oh, I'm doing this for very much functional reasons, and I feel the same with meditation. In time, it seems like this pleasant stillness becomes more pronounced, and it can be very, it's like a warm bath, it's just
Yeah,
nice.
it is, yeah. And I have to say, at the gym also, I can really, it's not that warm stillness exactly, but I can get into enjoying, the things I'm working on.
Yes.
And that so, yeah. And what you mentioned about how you can just drop things, it's interesting because, if somebody tells us, well, you can just drop that, we're very likely to go, no, I can't. you know, but but um but it's such an interesting inquiry just to live with. Like, is it possible just to drop this? Not to have the idea that I should be able to, or I can, or I can't. Um, but just to be curious, like, I mean, recently, a few days ago or something, I was in a kind of little dark place and kind of, and then I just had that thought, like, is it possible to just, and I was kind of into the story of, I'm in a dark place and blah, 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 and, and, and then just this thought, like, is it possible to just drop this whole thing? And, and then it was like, just, oh, because actually, every moment is fresh and new. Like the only thing that keeps perpetuating these things is that we keep thinking them, so it's sort of like, there is a certain energy and contraction in the body that comes along with these thought stories, and that may take a little longer to unwind. But if you're not resisting that or upset about that, it's just sensation in the body. So that with this particular experience I'm describing, there was still this kind of in the body, but I wasn't resisting it or
Yeah.
upset about it or taking it personally or giving it meaning, and it just kind of dissipated.
Yeah. And I'm just looking again at the posts that you wrote that I particularly enjoyed, and there's a couple of other bits I just want to read out. And you say everyone has at least a few minutes during any ordinary busy day that they could potentially devote to a kind of simple being while riding on a bus, train, or plane, or while sitting in a waiting room before an appointment. Instead of reaching for a magazine or your phone, particularly your phone, just be here. This is radical in our society. And yeah, because obviously we're talking about, at least to some degree, talking about meditation in somewhat of a, not structured, but taking some time to do it. But what that I think is so important.
Yeah.
There's that obviously famous Blaise Pascal quote of all of humanity's problems
Yes.
stem
Yeah.
from an
Yeah.
inability to sit in a room quietly. And
Yeah.
so just doing what you've said there, just a few minutes, when you're in a queue or
Yeah.
when you're waiting for a train, just no, don't do anything. Be conscious of that. And it can be utterly transformative, can't it?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think, to just in any day, there's just nobody is so busy that they don't have just a minute between clients or whatever, or while riding the bus to the appointment or whatever, that there isn't just a moment where you don't have to do anything. You don't have to check your phone or your messages or anything. And just the possibility of just stopping and being still. And, if you're on the bus, just enjoy looking out the window or looking at the other passengers, or close your eyes and enjoy that, whatever you want, it's like, but
Yeah. Yeah.
instead of immediately, going to something, some kind of
Yeah.
movie.
And the more you do it, it does seem to, the more you do that, or the more I've done that, it does become more enjoyable. But again, you can't have that as the goal of it,
Right.
It's
And you,
that it's that paradox.
and you notice more and more. You start to see all these things that you just
100%.
weren't seeing before. Like just the sound of traffic
Yeah.
is really wonderful to listen to. But if you're just thinking about it, oh, the sound of traffic, why do I wish it wasn't happening or something, Um, yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Right. Now, I want to just quickly um switch, as it were, although still the same topic. And I've listened to you on another podcast, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, where you spoke about the last couple of paragraphs in your book. And I think this is the book, Death, the End of Self-Improvement, where you
I
spoke about being with your mother in the last
Oh, no,
months of
that's
her
the end of my
life.
book. I've done several different podcasts with Rami Shapiro. Yeah,
All right. Okay.
that's actually the end of my book, Nothing to Grasp, where I talk about
Right. Okay.
my mother at the end of her life repeatedly saying, it's so freeing to realize that nothing really matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was such an impactful line on me. I told you I was on the tube when I listened to you reading that out, and there was this gentleman who was in a suit off to work, and I remember he had his fists like slightly clenched on his hand, and it just looked like it was pretty serious stuff. I mean, it may not have been, but he looked that way. I just remember being struck by that, and that really stuck with me. And I met up with a guy who hired me to do some talks in Texas just after, and I told him that line. I loved that. Nothing really matters that much, and how liberating that insight can be. Because we don't
Yeah.
live that way. We live like perpetually, like, no, okay, I've got through this, but then what about this? And then there's this coming. Like we continually live that way. So to have that insight as you did then, and then to share it as you have done through your book, or in my case, listening to you, It's seriously profound, that.
It is, yeah. Yeah, it was my mother's insight actually, because it was my mother, who lived to be
Yeah.
95, and she was and she wasn't saying this in some sort of nihilistic way. I mean, my mother was someone who cared deeply about injustices in the world and other people, and she was very, she was the kind of person that really gave to other people. So it wasn't coming from a place of, of anything like that. But she kept saying, she said it many times, it's so freeing to realize that nothing really matters. And and it felt like this burden had lifted from her. And
Yeah.
I it's a paradox, because of course, yes, of course everything matters in a certain way, it's a paradox. But it's like nothing really matters. It's sort of like nothing's really happening in the way we think it is. Like the more deeply you go investigate anything that seems solid, like my body, you don't find, you can't find anything solid there, or even where the inside and the outside, you know, it's like my body is the whole universe and it's moving, and, it's like, it's like, and then all the things that we think are happening are basically sort of these abstracted conceptual stories that that the mind comes up with. I love the image of, what appears as like Rorschach blots, and the pattern seeking mind is just,
Yeah.
interpreting them and making them into things. And that's kind of what we're doing all the time. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and, and, and,
Yeah.
and so it's like, and then it seems like everything really matters. But another thing about getting old, I'm 76 now, and it's like, so I've been through a lot of things. I've been through the Vietnam War and the civil rights movement, and all these different things historically. And you just get this feeling like that all these things keep recurring, and wars and this and that, and you sort of get this sense that, yeah, on one level, yeah, of course it matters. It does matter whether, you know whether you're okay right now and all that. But another level, it nothing matters. It doesn't really matter. It's like it's all this unfathomable happening, and we don't even know what it is. And like the old Chinese farmer story, the famous story about,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Maybe. Maybe. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, what you think is good fortune turns out to be not such good fortune, and what you think is not such good fortune turns. So all these things that we think are terrible, then out of them come things we think are wonderful, and we don't know how it all
Mm,
goes together, and we not in
yeah.
control of any of it really. I mean, we feels like we have choice, but we really, there's no one separate. There's if we the whole notion of choice and control is based on the idea of separation. It's based on the idea of there's me here and there's something over there that might control, And when we see through that, when it's just one whole happening, we are the flow. We are this flowing wholeness, and it's like,
Yeah.
and it's just doing what it does. And sometimes that's from our perspective horrible, and sometimes from our perspective it's wonderful, and sometimes what we think is horrible turns out to be wonderful, and vice versa. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
you know, and that's just so helpful, because it's so easy to get so caught up in, our personal drama and the world drama. And, again, nothing wrong with caring about what's going on and doing what we do, but nothing really matters, actually. Nothing's even happening in the way we think it is. We don't know what's going
No.
on here. We really don't know. I mean, we are absolutely clueless.
Yeah.
And it's that
Yes.
sounds scary to the sense of the little separate me, but in just being here without knowing what this is, without knowing what's going on, without needing to know, is it mind or matter? Is it this or that? With just being here, it's like just simply being alive, it's just so relaxing. It's like, I don't actually need to know, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't need to
Yes.
know. It's,
I talk. Yes, absolutely. And gosh, there are so many ways I could respond to that, including referencing my recent conversation with Dr. Robert Saltzman, who I know you know.
oh,
But
yes,
what I
Robert.
would just say would, yeah. But what I would just say is, uh, I like to distinguish between human and being. that we are human beings. Now, most people live as if they're just humans. So they are the body mind. Everything's dead serious. They are British. They are their name, etc., etc. And then there's the being side, which is what we've touched on. This sort of presence that is always present, and and I think some people can get a bit overly fixated to some degree on that. I recognize this, and that's all you need to do. Whereas I think for me, this sort of middle ground of, let's say, a foot in both camps,
Yeah.
and certainly having that foot in this being camp, and being in touch with the presence that we are, and then from there navigating the human world with a bit more, a bit of a lighter touch, shall we say. I think that for me seems to be, I find that an enjoyable way to sort of navigate things, and take into account what you've just said of, yes, things
Yeah.
are important, yes, we're going to suffer tragedy and loss and etc., but then there is this background sense of, actually, it's okay, this is always here, and that's not changing. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's made sense to you, but that's how I like to
Yeah.
encourage
Yeah.
to navigate life.
Yeah, I think sometimes spiritual people get sort of, or non-dual people get sort of, you know, into this thing where, they can't even use personal pronouns anymore, or use their first name
Oh.
or anything like that. It's just, some people have even gone so far as to call themselves nobody and things like that, take that as their name. And, it's like, yeah, I'm Joan Tollifson. But then when I start looking into it, I don't know what Joan Tollifson is. I mean, Joan Tollifson has been a zillion different things from one second to the next, and 1 year to the next, and 1 decade to the next. I mean, who's Joan Tollifson? I don't know. It's just a bunch of stories, and different.
Yeah.
It, and so it's like, but there is that I'm not going to go around denying that and saying I'm not Joan. I'm,
No.
and in fact, to me, one of the things that sort of emerges out of this bigger perspective, if you want to, this, more open perspective, is that I find myself freer to be Joan, to
Mm.
be as I am,
Mm.
rather than
Yes.
I
Yeah.
spent a lot of time trying to be somebody else, trying to be Nisargadatta or Ramana Maharshi, or,
Yeah.
trying to be some Tony Packer, trying to be somebody else. And,
Yeah.
finally, at this advanced age, I really feel like it's okay to be Joan Tollifson, and that I seem to be here in this drama to be Joan Tollifson, not to be Ramana Maharshi. I mean, somebody else was doing
Yeah.
that, or some other not someone, but anyway, I mean, yeah. So
Yeah.
and of course, you care about your children. I mean, it's not like nothing matters. Like that means you don't care what happens to your children. Of course, you care. You care deeply, But it's like, so it's always that balance, that paradox, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
finding, yeah. So and we're not
It
in
is that.
control of any of this. Yeah, it's just kind of all emerging.
Yeah. It is that balance and that paradox. And I love what you said there of having this broader perspective. It brings two things. First of all, what we spoke about at the start, the end of self-improvement,
Uh,
which comes as a blooming relief. And then, as you say, with the end of self-improvement comes the ability or the capacity to be the unique expression that we all are
yeah,
more fully. So
yeah,
again, it's another blooming paradox, isn't it? It's
yeah,
hilarious. Like, what goes around the houses that, yeah. Anyway,
and to
so I
be
just thought that ties back in nicely.
yeah, and to be okay with all Joan, with all of her flaws, and like, I don't have the feeling anymore that I'm going to neatly tie all this up somehow before I die, that I'm going to get it all together and Joan's finally going to be okay. And she finally won't get angry anymore, and she won't have opinions. She won't get opinionated anymore. And she'll just be, blissful all the time. And, it's just, I don't have that fantasy anymore at all, So,
And it's a
and
blooming relief letting go of that, right? It's such a
yeah,
relief letting go of that. Yeah.
yeah,
Which again does come back to this huge cultural phenomenon of self-improvement, and
yeah,
seeing that it's a trap and a way to kind of waste your life, like chasing an illusion that will never arrive. You're going to die before you ever improve yourself,
Yeah.
and there's no self to improve. So forget it.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Anyway.
you look at the universe. Suns are exploding and coming, things are being born and dying, and there's, volcanoes erupting and, tsunamis, and it's not like um it the problem is that we take it all so personally. Like, if I
Yeah,
erupt in
yeah,
anger, that's somehow personal. It means something about me. It means I'm a spiritual failure. I have, whereas if a volcano erupts, it's like, well, that's just, what a volcano does. And, but really
oh,
they're
yeah,
both equally impersonal and equally just movements of nature doing what it does, and yes, there's that
yeah,
capacity that we have through meditation and things like this to kind of have more insight into what's going on when we get angry, maybe. But that
yeah.
too is also just happening. I mean, that again is just a movement
Yes,
of nature. Everything that
yeah,
seems like some sort of intentional,
yeah.
um, goal directed thing is itself just happening,
Yeah, I know.
you know?
Oh God. I know. I would tell we could keep going on this ad infinitum. I know we could, but listen, Joan, it's been such a pleasure to spend time with you. You've got such a lovely, warm, fun, uh, youthful, exuberant energy. It's lovely to bathe in it with you. So I just want to say a huge thank you, and I'd love to hop on a call again sometime. And I knew this was that. I knew this was going to be fun, but it's been a real joy. So I just want to express my gratitude to you.
Well, I feel the same way. It's been a huge joy to be with you, Simon. I really enjoyed it. So, thank you for having me.